Hey guys, so it's time for another lecture. Today we are going to be going over chapter 7. So chapter 7, let's see. I know I'm a little off today. It's been a long day, so please forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, because remember what I told you. Whatever you get here is what you'd be getting if we were in real life, and it's been a rough day. But anyway, so chapter 7, we're going to talk a little bit about supporting your speech, gathering information, and research. So what are some different ways that you can get your information for your speech? Right here, use your library. I know most of you, or a lot of you at least, are not convenient to Austin Peay's Clarksville campus. If you are, the library there is amazing. If not, wherever you're at, try to find a library. That's a great way to get information for your speeches. Not just your speeches in this class, but in general, because again, remember, the stuff that we talk about here, it's not strictly for this class. It really is to help you in the future also. Search websites. Websites are a great source. Look up websites. Make sure that you're evaluating your research, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then using interviews, we're going to talk about those too. So your libraries, let's talk about those. If you are close to Austin Peay's Clarksville campus, the librarians there, they really truly are absolutely amazing. They are research gurus. They are great at it. They can pretty much help you with anything you want. Then it talks about some other things. I know some of you, especially those of you that are young, probably don't have a clue what a card catalog is. Just count yourself lucky. Yeah, a bit of a pain. So let's talk about the websites. Let's talk about the internet, which I'm sure that's probably what most of you guys are going to use. That does tend to be what most everybody uses, is the web. So it talks about some of the things that you can use. But please understand, there is one website you absolutely cannot use. And I'm sure a lot of you are sitting there thinking in your head, or maybe even said out loud what that is. But if you didn't, that is Wikipedia. You cannot use Wikipedia. If you don't know a whole lot about Wikipedia, the reason you can't use it is because anyone can go in and change what it says. It doesn't have to be factual information. People can change it. So we don't use Wikipedia. I do like to say Wikipedia can serve a purpose from time to time. That purpose would be the really good pages on Wikipedia. They actually do have sources. They cite their own sources. So if you are struggling to find a source, you can always look at Wikipedia and use those sources. Okay, evaluating your research. Timing of the article compared to material or relevance. How old is the article that you're reading? Is it recent? Is it 5 years old? Is it 10 years old? Is it 30 years old? You know, if you're talking about something that has to do with, say, computers, obviously something that is 6 months old versus 6 years old is going to be pretty different. So just make sure that you look at that. I think we had talked about this in another lecture, sponsorship, evaluate for bias. You know, you need to understand, as it says here, that some sponsors may have an agenda. You really do run into this, especially if you were talking about, say, a medication. Clearly, a drug manufacturer is not going to want to talk bad. I know a lot of you have heard about, well, we all know smoking's bad, right? But I'm sure most of you have heard that years ago, the cigarette manufacturers used to actually talk about how great it was, even though they already knew at the time that it was bad. So clearly they had an agenda. And then authorship. Is your author credible? What is their background experience? Do they have a bias? Do they not have a bias? Make sure you know who wrote your article, who wrote your book, whatever it is you're using, who wrote it, who was the author. And then interviews. I know a lot of times for this class, people don't really use interviews, but interviews in other areas can really be great. Obviously, if you can get your information directly from the source, it's so much better. So let's talk a little bit about that. So number one is right there. It says, go straight to the source. If you have an option between interviewing the person who's an expert versus their assistant, pick the expert if you can. Always go straight to the source. Be prepared. Make sure you have the questions that you want to ask ready to go. And that leads to the next one. Have questions ready. No leading questions. So when you ask them something, don't try to lead them into the answer that you want to hear. Ask your question, make it very simple, and wait and let them respond. Don't try to lead them in any direction. When it talks about don't ask for information that you can easily find, this can be really important when we start talking about time. It also doesn't look really good if, say, you are interviewing the CEO of a company and they have this fabulous website and has all this information, you know, when it was started, information about the CEO. Make sure you read these things first. Don't go in and ask, oh, when did you start your company? When it's right there all over their website. If you can find the answer to your questions, do that. Now, if you come across an answer to one of your questions and you're not 100% sure of its accuracy, you can always say something to the effect of, I saw on such and such website that your company was actually founded in. Is that the correct year? You can always do that. Be on time. You are asking someone to give their time to you. Make sure you are on time. Take detailed notes or record. I am personally a big fan of recording the interviews. And 9 times out of 10, if you ask the person you're interviewing if you can record the interview, they're going to be fine with it. Most people are not going to agree to give you an interview and then refuse to let you record it. You don't ever want to misquote somebody. Me personally, I'm not a good note taker. It's just not something I'm good at. Therefore, I'm going to record. Sorry, guys. Therefore, I'm going to record my interviews because I don't want to get anything wrong. So make sure that you're either recording or at the very least you're taking really, really good notes, because there really isn't anything worse than doing an interview with somebody and then you go to quote them and you misquote them. That is not good. And then finally, when it talks about staying on time, there's a reason that your speeches have a time frame, because it is really important. Again, you're asking somebody to give you their time, so you need to be respectful of it. And you don't know what else they may have going on that day. They may not have anything going on, or they may have 10 more meetings that day coming up. So whatever the time is, make sure you're respectful of it. Now, if the person you're interviewing is like, no, we can keep going, that's fine. By all means, keep going. But make sure that when you walk in, you have your game plan, that you have your questions, you don't have too many questions for the time, all of that good stuff. So just make sure that you're being really respectful of their time. So here are some general tips for your research. Obviously, start early. Now, clearly in this class, especially because this is the really quick 8-week class, you don't have quite as much time. You can't start quite as early, but try to start as early as possible. In the future, when you have to do research for something, whether it's for school, whether it's for a job, a nonprofit, a club that you're in, a group that you're a member of, try to start that research as early as possible. You also want to take really good notes on your research. Try to have a folder, a binder, something where you can keep everything nice and organized. And then make a preliminary bibliography or works cited page. Make sure you're writing these things down. Who are you reading? Who is this? Who is that? And then think about your research as you're writing. So when it talks about that, if you have looked something up and you found an article, and then in that article, it references something else, make a note of that so that you can go look this other thing up. All right, and then supporting ideas in your speech. So give examples, brief examples, hypothetical examples, extended examples. Just come up with some examples, For example, using a purple pen is really great. I mean, this was just laying right here. So whatever, whatever is going to work for you. Statistics, be specific, make sure that they are reliable, and cite your sources. Always, always, always cite your sources. Be accurate, be clear. This is really important when it talks about rounding up or down, especially when you start talking about numbers, because unless you happen to be like a numbers person, chances are you're not going to remember what someone said, especially if it's a bigger number. If someone says 1,378,647,013. Who's going to remember what I just said? I just said it and I don't even remember. So just round it up. 3.5 billion. 2.7 million. 1,200. Round it up, round it down, because as it says below there, you don't want to overwhelm your audience. And if you're giving them too many big, long numbers, you're going to overwhelm them, and they're going to kind of stop listening. They're going to go off somewhere. And then show them. This is where we get into the visual aids. You want people to see things, especially, again, numbers. If you're talking about various numbers, if you can show them a graph or a pie chart, something where they can visually see a representation of what you're talking about, it's going to make your speech much more impactful. People are going to remember that a whole lot more. A pie chart, for example, if you have 4 or 5 different sections in your pie chart, they may not remember exactly what the numbers are, but they're probably going to remember the picture in their head. So show them, don't just tell them. Testimonies. So peer testimony and expert testimony is exactly what it sounds like. A peer is someone who's on the same level as you. An expert is exactly that. It's somebody who is an expert in that field. So use testimony. That can be testimony from interviews, or that can also be testimony from your research that you're doing. Again, always cite your sources. You have to know your sources. You have to cite your sources. And you always want to be accurate in your information. This is where I always kind of talk about when you're coming up with your note cards for your speeches. A really good idea is to use different color inks. For example, the color red. Our brains are trained to stop when we see the color red. Stop signs, stop lights, things that are hot. These things are red. So our brains are trained to stop. Even as I look right up here at the top of my screen, there's a little thing that says stop share, and it's in red. So again, our brains are trained for red. When you have sources, when you have their quotes, write them out in red. That's going to make your brain say, ooh, this is important. I need to stop and I need to pay attention to this. And again, citing your sources. Citations must be given aloud. That should not just say should be given aloud. They must be given aloud. So your oral citations are going to need to include the author's name. If you don't know the author, and a lot of times you may not. So for example, if you look at the zombie apocalypse outline, you're going to notice it just says, according to the CDC or according to the Mayo Clinic. You may not know the author's name, but that is where you would always say the website. you have to say where it came from, whether that's the author's name, the name of the book, the name of the website. If it came from a book, you're going to have an author's name. The pertinent date, you don't necessarily have to have that. If you are comparing things, this is when you would want to talk about the dates. If you were talking about, maybe you're giving statistics for opioid overdoses, and you would want to talk about, according to the CDC in such and such year, this is how many people died from an opioid overdose. And then in this year. So those are the kind of times where you would want to do that. And then the sponsoring organization. Again, this is only if it's necessary. If it's a journal article from a drug manufacturer, you would want to make sure that that's known. Again, you have to cite your sources, not just in writing, but verbally. And the very last thing right there, it says that it's crucial to avoiding plagiarism. So please make sure you're citing those sources. That is also during your speeches. That is a place where you will lose points. You will lose points if you don't cite those sources. You have to have at least 3 of them. And that is that for organizing and gathering our information for our speeches. So ladies and gentlemen, as always, if you have any questions, please make sure you email me. Also, if you are in the online section of the class watching this, in the discussion board, there is a questions discussion board. You can always post your questions there. You can also email them to me, but please make sure that if you have questions, you let me know so I can answer them, because I can't answer them if I don't know what they are. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I will see you later for another lecture. I hope you all have a great day.